Live in a second.
Oh, the attendees are coming in. 7, 10, 13. Here we go. Welcome, everybody.
Wow, welcome.
Good evening. 19, 22, the numbers keep climbing. Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait a minute or two just to let everybody get in. We're very excited to be together tonight.
Jasmine, when did you start this group?
So Celebrate Dyslexia actually started a little over a year ago, but this book club was actually born out of COVID. At the beginning of March, we had a parent come to us and ask if we would start this book study, and we started with the Dyslexia Handbook for the state of Texas, and we thought it would just be 1 or 2 weeks and we would be done. And that went on for 6 weeks. And then another book came along with Dr. Sally Shaywitz, and she joined us for that book study. And then this was the next choice. So this is the third selection that we do. And then after I heard from you and Ned that you would be willing to join us, I couldn't just keep it to myself. I had to share it with my friends. And so we are just so excited that you are joining us in San Antonio tonight with our organizations. And I can't tell you how much the first time I heard you both on NPR really impacted me in my life as a mother at the time, before we knew anything about dyslexia. And I've been sharing it with absolutely everyone I know ever since. So this is kind of real right now that we're actually having a conversation.
Does Sally Shaywitz have a new book out, or is it Overcoming Dyslexia?
She just came out with her second edition, but it is virtually a complete rewrite of the first edition.
Really?
So it was really fun to get to visit with her and talk with her about some of the new things that have come out in her book. And she joined us for 2 sessions, which was really special for us. So we were really excited to have that opportunity with her, just as we're excited to have this opportunity with both of you. So thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. So I think we maybe wait 1 more minute, but while we wait, those of you that are joining as attendees, because this is a webinar, we can't see you, but you can see us. Let us know through the chat who's in the room. Please feel free to introduce yourself. We'll get started. Jasmine will kick us off here in about 30 more seconds. Awesome.
You see all of our board participants. I see my board chair just got on, so that's good. Hi, Carrie.
All right. Okay, Jasmine, you want to kick us off? I think we're good.
I would love to. Happy Thursday night, everybody. We are thrilled that you have joined Celebrate Dyslexia, City Education Partners, and Jewish Family Services for tonight's visit with Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson to talk about their amazing work, The Self-Driven Child. So welcome, everybody. I'll just tell you a little bit about Celebrate Dyslexia. Our mission is to foster a community to celebrate, educate, and empower the 1 in 5 with dyslexia. We're so glad that you've joined us tonight, and we're having this conversation about the self-driven child. I will pass it on to Dahlia to tell us about City Education Partners.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here in fellowship and community with all of you, with Jasmine and Celebrate Dyslexia and Tali at Jewish Family Services. I work with City Education Partners, and we're committed to ensuring that every child in San Antonio is in a high-quality school that allows them to achieve their dreams and live a choice-filled life. And we're really excited about this conversation tonight, and I'll pass it over to Tali.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for allowing us to be here with all of you. I'm so proud and excited to be partners with, of course, Celebrate Dyslexia and my very good new friend, Jasmine and Dahlia from City Education Partners. This is our second event together, which is really wonderful. We are Jewish Family Service. We've been around since 1973. We do social services, mental health services, and senior services for anyone in the community. We could not be more proud to be a partner in this, as we have now shifted our focus a bit to schools and children, especially during this period of time. So thank you, Bill and Ned, so much for being here and being a part of this conversation with so many people who need it during this period of time. Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and get us started with our conversation. For those of you that have read The Self-Driven Child, we can tell you, Bill and Ned, that you are champions of an ongoing pep rally for parents, and we are so grateful. And they might not know it yet, but you are our children's unsung heroes. So we are really grateful to have this time with you and this gift that you've given us to join us for our book club. So I'll let our audience know a little bit about you. And I apologize, I am going to read this because I don't want to get anything wrong. But Ned is a professional tutor geek, which I love that title, by the way. Since 1993, he's spent nearly 40,000 one-on-one hours helping students conquer an alphabet of standardized tests and honing his interpersonal skills. I can only imagine. A battle-tested veteran in the fields of test prep, stress regulation, and student performance, Ned coaches clients to manage their anxiety and find the motivation to reach their full potential. Welcome, Ned. Bill is a clinical neuropsychologist and founder of the Stixrud Group, a lifespan neuropsychology practice. He is also a member of the adjunct faculty of the Children's National Medical Center, and he holds a faculty appointment as assistant clinical professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington School of Medicine. Additionally, Dr. Stixrud is a frequent lecturer and has authored scientific articles on transcendental meditation and book chapters on meditation and the integration of the arts into education. Represented here are the dynamic duo of specialties that so many parents of struggling children rely on and are desperate to find. As Celebrate Dyslexia began a book club specific to dyslexia, there were common themes that kept coming up in our conversation: anxiety, stress, depression, souls dying in school, motivation, executive function issues. And I realized that there was another really great source that wasn't necessarily in the dyslexia world that would be great for us to touch on, which is The Self-Driven Child. Your book unites all parents. Those of us that feel that our children are on a fast track to struggles in schools, and others that might not experience these issues until later on with natural development. When I personally heard you on NPR, I drove extra miles so I didn't miss out on your interview.
Driveway moments, right? Woohoo!
Thank you for walking us through this cultural shift in parenting through the lens of the self-driven child and highlighting the scientific evidence for how our brains develop. Just a couple of housekeeping issues, which I think most of us are used to at this point. The chat bar is available for your questions. And as we carry on this conversation tonight, there will be polling questions that we're going to pop up that we'd love for you to answer, so it can kind of help guide us as to what we spend more time on. So we'd love for you guys to let us know how you heard about the event. And there are a couple of options for you to pick there. And what necessarily drew you to the event, which topic. So I was really happy that Ned sent some questions today also to ask you. And one of the first questions we're going to have you answer is, what age are your children? And you'll see a series of options there that you can pick. Dahlia, is that something that you're going to be able to pop up? Or John? You're both muted, so.
Yes, I'm hoping to. In the meantime, while I work on this, the first question is, and I'll put it in the chat for everyone, is how do you identify, maybe you're a parent and a teacher, a leader of a school, a community member, other, but let us know how you identify and the age or age range of your children while I get the poll going.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll get started with kind of the meat of our topic tonight. Will you both tell us about the concept of parents functioning as children's consultants instead of managers?
You know, some 30 some years ago, early in my career, I was just struck by how many kids that I tested, especially kids with dyslexia or ADHD, who hated school and didn't turn in their work on time. And I'd ask the kids, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And invariably the kid said, my mom. And then my dad, then my teacher, then my tutor, then my therapist. And the kid was never on the list. And so many parents would say, kids with learning disabilities or ADHD, they'd say, in our home after dinner, it's like World War III. And it just didn't make any sense because in 1986, I reviewed the literature on homework, the research on homework for the first time. And it turned out homework doesn't contribute to learning in elementary school. So there's something terribly wrong with this picture. So I wrote an article, it was actually in McCall's magazine, saying, just tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. Now, I'm happy to, I want to do anything I can to help you. I'm happy to be your homework consultant. I'll set my own consulting hours, but I'm not willing, you're the most precious thing in the universe to me. I'm not willing to chase around the house and yell at you and act like it's my job to make you work. I couldn't make you work. All I'd have to do is flop on the floor. And so the idea is that we offer him, that I want kids with dyslexia or kids with ADHD, anybody, I want them to have the help they need. But I don't want them to spend year after year after year fighting other people's attempts to help them. It's just, I've gone to school meetings where a resource teacher or a learning specialist says, it takes 2 learning specialists and a tutor and the mom on top of the kid all the time to get him to do anything. And that doesn't change until the energy changes. So when Ned and I started lecturing together and writing together, we thought, let's use this idea of a consultant as opposed to the kid's manager or boss or homework police like that. And if you can't make a kid do something, I mean, you clearly couldn't make him do his homework, you just have to close his eye. Then it couldn't be your responsibility as a parent to make it. So let's change the way we think about this. Let's change our relationship, and let's respect the kid. This is his life. This is his work, and we can help him, but not try to force. Ned, do you want to?
Well, yeah, no, I have a sort of an interesting role in sort of AirSAT's education, right? Where I'm, one standardized test, boo hiss. But also I'm trying to help kids, do their best, be motivated, be not overly stressed. And I don't really have a lot of the kind of typical tools we might think. I really have neither carrots nor sticks, right? I can't hold a grade over them. I can't take their phone away. I can't ground them, right? I'm not giving them a grade. I'm not giving them cookies. I'm not giving them a gold star. I'm not, there's no bribes involved here at all. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how do I help kids find within themselves the motivation to do the things, and sort of keep on it. And Bill and I are in the middle of writing a second book with a working title of What Do You Say, based on the kind of principles of the self-driven child. But how do you talk to kids in a way to help them find their own motivation? How do you talk to be consultative? And so all these stories are popping through my head. And I remember years ago, actually this is one of the very first students I worked with, 1993, okay? And she was not doing her homework for me. And the second week, the third week, she's not doing her homework. And I got, I was frustrated, I was concerned. I thought, I'm gonna be in trouble. And I know lots of parents who have kids who aren't sort of stepping up in ways that maybe the teachers expect them to. The parents worry that they're gonna be in trouble. So I reached out to mom and dad and say, Sally's not doing her homework. Foolishly, the worst mistake, just terrible, right? And so the girl came in, so as though she was only not doing homework for me. She wasn't doing homework anywhere. This is just where she was for now, right? So she came back in and then sat there for the next 6 sections we had. I'll try to adjust my level. And she sat there for an hour at a time for 6 more weeks. brutal, right? Brutal. And, you know, to echo Bill's point, you can't make kids do you can't make any of us do what we don't want to do or want what we don't want. And so at this point, my energy with kids, after I, you know, make nice with mom and dad, is to say, I work for you, to the kid. I work for you. I'm on your side. I will do whatever I can to help you be successful. You know, if your mom and dad ask, I will never lie to them, but I won't rat you out. And here, like the story I just told there. And so my job is all about what helps you be successful up until the point that they fire me, in which case maybe I'm probably off. But it's never happened, because when I'm on their side and they feel that I'm, you know, unalterably on their side, it helps enormously. And obviously the folks who are on the call here, a lot of you have kids for whom learning isn't easy, and it's just so hard not to get stressed and feel like the most important thing short term is to get, you know, get this work done or get a good grade or whatever. And short term success, maybe. Long term, just a disaster, right? You know, and you know, one of the points that Bill and I make in our book is that the most important outcome of childhood and really adolescence, especially and in high school, is not where you go to college. And I say this as a guy who's helped people get into college since 1993. But the most important outcome is not where you go to college. It's the brain that you develop and the brain that you're going to carry into adulthood, right? So we want kids to be tolerant of stress because the world's kind of stressful, right? And working hard is stressful. And we want them to have motivation, right? And we want them, as Bill would say, when they finally get that success, that hard-earned success, to have a brain that's able to enjoy it. Because I saw one of mom on the chat said she's got a kid who's struggling with some, you know, ADHD and dyslexia and anxiety. And Bill and I are just enormously concerned about what the effect is on developing brains if they're chronically stressed, because it puts kids in a really dark place. And the world is stressful enough. School is really stressful if you struggle as a learner. And we want kids to be able to come home and have home be kind of a safe harbor. But parents can't be the safe harbor if they're also one of the storms.
Which I have to tell you, as we've been working our way through your book, we are constantly encouraged to hold a mirror up and not really focus on our children so much, but realize what our position is. And it's just incredible at the end of every chapter when we realize that it's really the mirror that we're looking at, not so much the behaviors of our children that we're trying to change. It's really us that need to look at this from a different perspective.
And of course, all the mistakes that we all make, the mistakes that you make as a parent, the mistakes that I make as a parent, we do it because we love our kids. Right. I mean, it's all motivated for the right thing. And so we don't want anyone to change being interested in their kids being happy and successful. It's just kind of the how.
Right. It's coming at the other angle. The thing that I didn't talk about in our introduction are the titles of your chapters, which you've already mentioned one, Bill, that have become now old friends, because I read this book before school starts every single year just to kind of get my head in the game and refocus on really the attitude and how I can most help my children through the beginning of the year and kind of into their academic career that year. And I'll just name a couple of these chapter titles for those that haven't read the book yet. The first one starts with Why a Sense of Control is Such a Big Deal. The one that was already mentioned, I Love You Too Much to Fight with You About Your Homework, which is just huge. Really, this radical idea of telling our kids that it's their call to make a decision and decide what they want to do. In this day and age, to hear about radical downtime is like a breath of fresh air. And one of my favorites, especially with my friends of older children, the SAT, ACT, and other four-letter words.
Bill gets credit for that one. He's the clever one of the duo.
It was Vera.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
But another question we wanted to ask our audience was, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being totally zen, 10, I've completely lost it. Where's your stress most of the time? And that it looks like that popped up, so you guys can answer that. And then likewise, we wanted to ask on a scale of 1 to 10, totally zen, 10 being I've lost it, where do you think your kids are in terms of stress most of the time? So while we're getting answers to those questions, let's keep going with our conversation. Tell us more about a child's autonomy. Why is this so important?
Well, the main thesis of the self-driven child is that a sense of control is the most important thing we can give a kid, besides knowing that they're deeply loved. This sense of control, because there's all this research that suggests that a sense of control is hugely beneficial for everything. A sense of control, we think about it in two dimensions. One is that this subjective sense of autonomy or agency. This is my life, and I'm not helpless, I'm not hopeless, I'm not overwhelmed. And so it's that subjective sense of autonomy, but it's also the brain state that supports it. And that brain state is when the prefrontal cortex, which can think logically, the most recently evolved part of the brain, regulates the rest of the brain, including the amygdala. And we know that the best neurological marker of emotional resilience is the strength of the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And so what we want is we want to support that sense of autonomy, and also support, as Ned was saying, that development of that brain state where you're in your right mind. Because when you're focused, when your kid is focused and engaged in something and working hard, and what's happening is a lot of energy, a lot of effort, but it's not that stressful. And we also know, we talk about in the book, we talk about research by a guy named Steve Mayer at the University of Colorado, who studied rodents his whole life. Well, probably not as a child, and so the basic paradigm is rat A and rat B. They're in a plexiglass cage. The tail is outside the cage. There's a little wheel in the cage. Rat A discovers that if he turns, the tails get shocked. And rat A discovers if he turns the wheel, the shock stops. Rat B turns the wheel, nothing happens. Rat A has this experience of turning the wheel, and his prefrontal cortex activates and dampens down the stress response. And he's just not very stressed, but he goes into coping mode. And rat A, when he has that experience of several times of being shocked, you can disconnect the wheel. The wheel doesn't work anymore, and he still goes into coping mode, not very stressed, and just turns that wheel to cope. Rat B becomes a nervous wreck. And Steve Meyer says that the sense of control, it inoculates you from the harmful effects of stress. And so that's part of it, is the emotional mental health. I mean, just think about it. When you're anxious, your thinking is out of control. If you're depressed, you have no sense of control. So a sense of control, the sense of autonomy or agency, it's so important from a mental health point of view. But also, I mean, Dad, do you want to talk about the motivational piece?
Sure, yeah. And I'll throw in really quickly to the stress piece. One of the researchers whom we talk about in our book is a woman named Sonia Lupien, who heads the Center for Studies of Human Stress at Montreal. And she has this beautiful acronym of what makes people nuts, right? So what makes you crazy, right? And so N is novelty, new situations. So think about this coronavirus. It's not like the old hat coronavirus. It's the novel coronavirus, right?
Right.
U, unpredictability, right? If you knew that you go in a restaurant, you'd be fine, or you knew it's that uncertainty that's really, really hard. T is perceived threat. And mostly for kids, up until COVID, for most of us, it was really threat to ego. And so this is one of the things that's so paralyzing for kids who have difficulty reading, is you start in second grade and everyone's going to take turn reading out loud. I was just hearing something in NPR, this woman, and she's, my age now, and talked about how anytime it was reading time, she'd go to the bathroom and she'd just hang out there for the whole time and wait, because it was so threatening to her ego. And then S is the low sense of control. And it turns out that's, as Bill said, that's the most important one, because we can tolerate novelty, unpredictability, and threat so long as we feel like there's something we can do. But if we're without a sense of control, then everything's kind of kablooey. And of course, COVID right now is kind of hitting all four of those. From a motivational perspective, the dominant model of motivation that we look at is something called self-determination theory. And really quickly, when we think about motivation, it can be internal or intrinsic motivation, sort of I'm doing this because I want to, or it can be external or extrinsic. And so the classic measures of motivating people are those carrots and sticks, right? If you don't do this, something bad will happen. I'll take something away. If you do it, I'll bribe you, I'll reward you, whatever. And we know that carrots and sticks work short term, but they don't work long term. And importantly, there's no point at which all those carrots and sticks sort of morph into inner drive. And so from our perspective, the people who you know, the self-determination theory is one of the most supported models in all of psychology, and make the point that it's not the quality of it's not the quantity of motivation that matters, it's the quality, particularly if we want to have influence over kids, not have power, so that when they move forward, you know, these things are still in their heads. So the question then, of course, is how do we foster inner motivation? And fortunately, there's an answer to that. So self-determination theory holds that to foster intrinsic motivation, we need three things. We need a sense of competency, right? And so if your kid really struggles with reading, she doesn't want to work harder at it to get better, or she doesn't want to do it at all. So that's where you need a lot of handholding, a lot of support, extra help, all those things that help develop skills so people at least feel competent. The second thing is a sense of relatedness. And this is why great teachers are worth their weight in gold, because it's not that they get kids to work hard. They get kids to want to work hard, which is just magically different. And then the third thing is that they need a sense of autonomy. As Bill said, that subjective sense that I'm in this because I want to, I have a say, I'm not just along for the ride. I'm not a passive, you know, participant in my own life. I'm an active participant. And the key thing about this for competency, relatedness, and autonomy is we think of it as a three-legged stool. They just have to be in balance. Now, you know, we've spent some time in your corner of the world. You know, we thought DC was the only, you know, sort of intense academically focused, you know, partly, you know, apparently wrong place. Apparently we've not cornered the market on that yet. And so in my experience, when loving parents who really want their best for their kids, including academics, if they were going to sort of lean in a little too heavy on one of those three things, what might it be, right? And of course, it's the competency, right? You know, you will get you extra tutors, you know, your kid's playing soccer. Well, is she on the travel soccer team? We should get her coach for that, right? And we kind of weaponize childhood with the idea of the competency is everything. But the problem is, 2-year-olds don't care about college. 7-year-olds don't care about college. Even 12-year-olds, you really can't start talking to kids in a credible way about college till they've gone through, you know, puberty and they're in high school. And then it's a solid time to talk about this. And so when we focus on that competency piece, we risk, and typically do, undermine the relatedness, their connection with us, which is priceless, right? You can outsource anything except for being mom and dad. And we absolutely undermine their autonomy. And the longer kids are in school, the less autonomy they have. You have way more free time, play time, you know, choice time when you're in kindergarten than when you're 16-year-olds in high school and you have to raise your hand to say, I need to go to the bathroom, and someone has to tell you whether you're allowed to go. I mean, seriously? And so one of the concerns we have is during this whole time when the pressure is higher in high school and the autonomy is lower, if we as parents also exacerbate that problem by trying to exert more autonomy, then we're really whacking the you know, cumulative amount of autonomy that a kid has over her own life. And it's just, and then we're surprised that they're not, you know, fully motivated.
Well, I really love the analogy that you use in the book about a child working on a Lego set. It's just challenging enough, rewarding enough, doable, but not super easy. And I really love that you talk about the importance of practicing that, and you call it the flow, right? And you talk about how that is eventually understanding what that feels like, and accomplishing that is what's going to keep an individual in a career one day, and how
completely true
that is. And when I read it again recently, I thought about how true that is as an adult looking back. That was really so important for me to be able to identify. And now I can see it as an adult as to what I've chosen to do with my life. It meets all of those components that you talk about.
Well, I'll let Bill riff on this for a moment, but if you and let me just sort of brag on him a little bit. Bill just turned 70, and he's been, you know, clinical neuropsychologist for almost 40 years, right? Most people will be retiring right? He could retire. I mean, he can retire. He sold his practice. He could retire, right? And we were talking about this the other day, and he said, I feel like I can still help people. And, you know, if you lived in DC, you would know this. There's no better neuropsych. If you have a kid who's struggling and you're trying to understand what's going on and why, there's no one. I mean, there are people who are very good, but Bill is as good as they get. I mean, he doesn't get better. And part of it, I assume that his work is so darn satisfying because he takes these kids who are really struggling and parents are out of their minds. And he goes, we understand. I can help you understand what's going on here. And I can show you things that will make a difference, right? And how cool is that? I mean, talk about a flow experience of every day taking on things that are hard, because he doesn't do the easy ones, right? Because you know he's got such a long waiting list. It's people who like, I need that guy, right? And he didn't get that, you know, by doing this for a year. He got this by doing this for decades.
Well, thank you, my friend. And
You're welcome.
some years ago, I was reading. I read about this guy named Reed Larson, who studied he studied basically adolescence and adolescent motivation. And he asked the question, how do children turn into self-motivated adolescents and adults? And it turned out it wasn't through dutifully doing their homework every night. It was through what he called the passionate pursuit of pastimes. And so the idea is the kids building a Lego set and really into it. A lot of activation in the brain, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of focus, a lot of determination, but low stress. That's the flow state. The flow state when you're completely engaged. You aren't thinking about something else. You aren't overwhelmed. You aren't bored, but you're completely engaged. When I read that, it made sense to me because I was a C+ student in high school. I graduated with a 2.8 grade point average. And eventually it turned out I only needed a 2.5 to get into the University of Washington at that time. I still kick myself for having overachieved and spent all that time studying and stuff. But I was in high school and I never finished a book. I never came close to finishing a book. I never turned in anything on time, but I was a passionate rock and roll guy. I was in a rock and roll band. Every night I'd spend 2 or 3 hours learning songs. I always tell myself, well, I'll do music for a while, then I'll study. I just never studied. And it turned out that my father died right at the end of my senior year of high school. I kind of matured me quite a bit. So I went from basically flunking English senior year in high school to straight A student in college 3 months later. And I think that I sculpted a brain that knew how to go pedal to the metal. When school became important to me, through this passionate pursuit of pastimes. And so, yeah, this flow experience, there's just nothing like it. And ideally, that's where most of the time as adults in adult life, we want to be engaged. We want to be focused. We want to be in the moment. We want to have energy, but we don't want to be highly stressed. And that's what that flow experience is.
Right. And part of the thing about the flow experience is when that wiring in the brain can generalize, right? So it's possible that your kid just isn't sort of psyched for really anything that he's studying in school right now. But as Bill would say, as long as the kid is like into something, right? It's rock climbing, it's coding, it's music, it's theater, it's small engine repair, it's something where they're just working and working and working and working. They're sculpting that brain. And then they just wait for the thing that they really want to get into. They really want to study, right? Where we put so much energy onto trying to make kids want to do well in school. And then they kind of go through the paces and they do it begrudgingly. But it's wiring a brain that's resistant to working hard rather than one that's sort of, experienced that joy, that flow, that being in the zone of working hard. And so again, the quality of that experience matters more than what it is that they're engaged in. About
what age do you think that a child starts to develop this?
It comes out of play. Right? It comes out of play. My son just started his freshman year of college. He still likes getting Legos for his birthday. He's still. Okay. Now, when I was a kid, I have a twin brother. My brother and I had 8 million Legos, right? My pastime up here, Bill's heard about this. I'm in upstate New York right now. My family has a little cabin up. We fled since COVID. And I have since 2006 been rebuilding a stone wall. Now you can't tell by looking at me. I'm barely 160 pounds, barely 5'10". I am not the guy who's built to move enormous friggin' rocks. But what do I do with my vacation time? That's right. I've been rebuilding the stone wall for 14 years, right? And it's applied Legos, but much cooler, and you can possibly break things.
Do they interlock together? That's what I want.
Sadly, it's much more frustrating than that.
To get them
Much
to stick together.
So the short answer is play, you know. And when you look at things like, you know, Finland, they don't really have organized instruction. For years at school, they're just kind of putting kids in places where they can play. I mean, for me, when I was in second grade, I loved math, and the school that I was at, just like kids have those little reading books and they can go as fast as they want, they had that for math, and it was basically self-directed. So I was doing long division at age 6. Which is, I guess, uncommon. I don't know. I don't even know what I haven't paid that close attention to what's, you know, current today. But I was just, you know, for me, this is so much fun, right? No one was teaching me. I was learning because it felt to me like play. And if we could, it's hard to do that. And I don't want to wag a finger at teachers or school systems, but as much as we could have that. So kids are built to play. Children are born curious. I mean, this is the hard part about being a parent, right? Is you get these little things, and how do they explore the world? They walk around everything, stick in their mouth. They're like, oh my gosh, don't put that in your mouth. But kids are naturally born curious. We have to beat the curiosity out of them.
So tell me, how does this play out as kids start arguing more? Coach us through this as parents. How does this play out? How do we do this?
I will tell you, Bill, I'm sure, has a more sage take on this, but my perspective is if your kids argue with you, great. Great. For 2 reasons. One, do you really want to have children? Does anyone ever want to have children or be people who just blindly accept what people tell us? Whether that's spouses or bosses or media or politicians, you want people to question things. I had years ago a family, and Dad said, my goodness, she questions everything that I do. I said, isn't that amazing? And he looked like me, like Matt goes nuts. And I said, I want my kids to question everything that I tell them. Hopefully not being like super cranky about it. But in perfect world, my kid will be like, gosh, I don't know about that. I mean, just really, is that? And then he'll think about it, and he'll think about it, and he'll think about it, and he'll beat it up and examine it from every possible direction. And then if he comes away thinking, Dad makes a good point, then it's become his belief, and he's not blindly accepted it. And the other thing is that learning to argue, and particularly we all know this from the world today, one of the challenges that I think we as a country have is figuring out how to disagree agreeably, right? And so I want my kids to be able to argue with me in peaceful ways, right? It can be a little intense, but without screaming and everyone going to pieces, right? Because that's an incredibly important skill for healthy relationships, for being a good citizen, for workplace, right? And so when we have kids when our children argue with us, we're trying to help them learn that as a skill as well. And particularly if they're little guys, I used to tell this to my wife. I said, if our daughter, if she's anywhere close to being credible, we need to at least sometimes let her get her way. Because obviously, you know, when I'm 50 and my kid is 5, I can out-argue her, obviously, right? But what will happen is if kids don't feel like they can get their way or at least, you know, get to a happy place using their words, what will they do, right? They'll have a tantrum. It'll scream. It'll be all emotion, no reason. They'll lie. They'll cheat. They'll go work. If they don't feel like they can work within the system to have their needs met or their wants met, they'll go outside the system.
So how does this apply to parenting a teenager with executive functioning issues associated with ADHD? How do we balance responsibility as a parent and giving our children the independence that they crave and still somewhat be socially acceptable at a parent-teacher conference?
If you had to pick 2 out of 3 of those, which one would you let go?
Probably being socially acceptable,
okay,
but that in itself is a process that we learn over time, right?
Fair.
The first year, when I moved to Washington, D.C., I was a neuropsychologist at Children's Hospital here for a year or so. And within the first couple of weeks, I tested 2 kids with ADHD. One was 19, freshman in college, and one was 7. It was a girl and a boy. And the girl with ADHD would come home dutifully, sit down, sit with their mother, do her homework, and then she'd go out and play. And the boy had flunked all his, literally all his classes the first semester of college, was in the second semester. And the parents said he's really turned it around. He's going to meet with all his teachers. He's really working hard. And the kid tells me, I haven't been to class in 3 weeks. Yeah, he was 19 and she was 7. And for me, what I'd made out of that was that it wasn't a matter of neurological maturation. I mean, that's a big deal, but it's a real big deal. But it's not 19 versus 7. Is a matter of who had the accurate model of whose responsibility it was. And this girl saw it as her work. This boy spent most of his adolescent years fighting other people's attempts to get him to work. And what I've noticed over the years is if in situations like this kid, where adults are spending 90 units of energy trying to get the kid to work, the kid will spend 10. And if the adults get more anxious and go up to 95, the kid goes down to 5. And it's like judo in some ways. It doesn't change until the energy changes. So my feeling, and having raised an adolescent with ADHD, who eventually got a PhD in psychology, and is this principle, the principle that this is his life. I can't make him do it. I can't make him want what he doesn't want. This principle is so powerful because it's respectful. We assume that kids want their lives to work, and that's what we want to support. And also, as Ned was saying, I don't know, part of the reason that we're such big fans of encouraging kids to make their own decisions is that I don't know what's best for them. And I don't know what's best for them in part because I don't know ultimately who they want to be. And what I want to support is children making decisions for themselves, paying attention to what's important to me, what do I really want? And so I think that it worked. This stuff works. I mean, Jesus. I saw a family where I tested all 4 of their kids at least twice, and Ned did SAT prep for all 4 kids. The mom loves us, and we love her. And I tested her youngest son at one point. It was 15, bad ADHD, a lot of anxiety, learning disabilities, and he was a complete mess. This is academically, emotionally, socially, complete mess. Mom reads The Self-Driven Child, and she just kind of girds her loins. I'm going to give this a try. I trust these guys. And so she got a very demanding job, so she wouldn't have to watch. But we got an email this past fall saying he's a senior in high school, and he's just been invited to the National Honor Society. And 2 of his teachers said he is the most incredible kid. And it's really treating kids respectfully. And it's recognizing that even if we wanted them to do better or work harder, we can't make them. And that doesn't mean that we don't set limits. And it doesn't mean that if our kids fighting us about stuff, that we have a conversation about it. Well, once we're cooled down, we don't want to argue. You don't want to have a long argument, because then basically you're talking amygdala to amygdala. You want to talk prefrontal cortex to prefrontal cortex when you aren't stressed. So the arguing part, we don't want to do a lot of arguing like this. This never goes anyplace. We can have we talk a lot in the book about collaborative problem solving. When we're cooled down, we start with empathy, and we say, it seems like we've been butting our heads about this, and I can see from your point of view why this is so important to you. And yet also, I'm not sure I could feel like I'm a good mom if I say, okay, just do this. So we negotiate with kids. We do this collaborative problem solving to find a solution that works for us and works for them.
Well, what I want to do is I want to pop another question up on the screen to get some more audience participation. Compared to pre-COVID schooling, how does your child find school now? A bit better? About the same? Not as good? Decidedly worse? And while we get some answers for that, let me continue by asking another question that a parent included with this group. With the pendulum of learning environments swinging from super stringent to super lax, do you believe that there's a benefit to highly structured, highly rule-oriented learning environments?
I'll let Bill jump in on that in a moment, but one point we make in The Self-Driven Child is there are parents who are sort of more authoritative, sort of borderline authoritarian, and will say things like, you know, but my kid's coach is like that. My kid's coach is on him all the time and totally demanding and so on and so forth. So why isn't that okay for me to do as a dad? And our feeling on that is your kid chooses to be on the basketball team or the football team with a really demanding coach, right? And if they say at some point, you know, this is the balance of this isn't right, it's too much, I kind of change my mind, and they can step away. But we don't get to do that with mom or dad. So you know, so I mean, obviously the 60 years of research have shown that the best model for parenting, and I would say for school as well, is neither authoritarian, you know, my way or the highway, command and control, nor laissez-faire, hey, do whatever the heck you want. It's authoritative, where there are limits set up in advance, expectations set up in advance, ramifications set up in advance, you know, chance for feedback, blah, 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 but then a huge amount of autonomy within that. And the whole thing is done in a respectful way. So when I think about a kid going to a school that's highly, highly structured, I think so long as the kid has choice about that. So I'm working with a young woman right now who is brilliant as ADHD in an impulsive way that's kind of atypical of girls. I mean, she's bonkers. And she basically said, half of my teachers hate me and the other half love me, but they all want to try to fix me, right? And then they get frustrated because they're not gonna fix her. And so I asked her, how's this COVID thing been? And she said, it's been terrible for me. She said, I really am someone who benefits from a lot of structure. And so she recognizes that she has done really well in an independent girls' school in our part of the world that is very structured. And it's demanding, but she's cognitive. She's such a bright kid, she can handle that. And so she knows that this is good for her. And so I think when we're helping kids choose schools, you know, we want to talk about, you know, the pros and cons of this. Maybe actually, Bill, do you want to tell the story about the, you know, kid repeating second grade or not? Because we really, you know, kids need to feel like when we're doing things, that we're doing things for them or with them. We're not doing things to them, because then, as Bill has said before, kids will use all of their energy resisting what is in their own best interest.
Yeah. So going back to this decision, chapter 3 of our book is called "It's Your Call."
Right.
And the idea, and I felt most of my career that the best message you can give a teenager is besides I'm crazy about you, is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing this before I send you off to college. And so, and I think, so I got to this in part because early on in my career, it was much more common than it is now for kids to repeat a grade in public school, particularly kindergarten and first grade. And I'd test somebody who's 19 and I'd say, where are you in school? And they say, well, I'm a senior in high school. I should be a freshman in college, but my parents made me repeat the first grade. They're still pissed about it. You know, it's 12 years later. And so what I started doing, this may sound crazy, I started doing is saying, let's tell the kid, nobody's going to make you repeat the grade, but it's going to be your call. But let's think through the pros and cons. And I'd see these 6- and 7-year-old kids talk with their parents. They come in and talk with me. They talk with their teacher about what, am I ready for second grade, that kind of thing. And I saw these kids could make as good a decision for themselves as I could make for them. And I'm not suggesting that 6- and 7-year-olds make all their own decisions. I am saying that supporting this autonomy, its decision-making, is a hugely affirmative thing to do with kids. You say, this is your life, and I want you to practice. And with little kids, we start out by giving them choices. And as they get older, we transfer from encouraging them to make decisions to requiring them to make important decisions about their own life. So they practice. Some of the kids that we see go off to college and are home by November because they don't have the experience that this is my life and I need to learn how to run it.
Right.
And part of it I would add to that too is we all make decisions and they turn out not to be always the perfect decisions, right? And if you're human, that's sort of how it's gone. And if I get to make the decision for myself, if I'm someone's kid here, and it doesn't work the way I expected, I'm hugely committed to making it work. If you force the decision on me, then I'm in some ways committed to it not working, right? And so if you say, well, Ned, that's a terrible idea. So I'm going to do it anyway, Mom, right? I'm going to do it this way. I don't want to have to eat crow. I don't want to have to come back and say, you were right, right? I'm going to work and work and work and work to somehow pull it out of the fire, somehow make it work. And isn't that what we want for all of us, right? You make a decision, it's like it didn't go according to plan. Well, how much of life goes according to plan? And they say, well, okay, now what do I do? Okay, now what do I do? Okay, now what do I do? And that's when we think about people being entrepreneurial. I mean, all those pivots, right? Okay, and now. And you don't get that unless you have the opportunity to do that. And I'm just convinced if it's my call and it's my decision, I'm going to work and work and work to make it work.
So I have to tell you that last week we talked about this long-term relationship in our book club. Sorry, we talked about this what is the end goal, right? Is it just to get our kids to graduate from high school? No, it's to start this pattern of establishing a healthy relationship with them in the future. And we talked about how it doesn't just happen when they turn 18 unless we've practiced all along. It doesn't just happen when they get married unless we've practiced all along. And that again is a reminder of holding the mirror up to ourselves.
May I share a story? So there's a story in the book when my son, who again is now a freshman in college, was in middle school. And my wife is as a teacher, she's a Latin teacher of all things, and she's a great educator. She's also, maybe like a lot of people on the call, incredible with executive functions, can just very, very organized mind. And so she was helping him with something. I'm over there cooking dinner, and something was amiss. Something had not been handed in, something had not been done. I'm not sure what. And my wife, just a little tweak of frustration is, well, why did you whatever? And my son sort of reciprocated that and said, because you didn't remind me. And I'm like, oh boy, okay, this is, I come and sort of jump in the middle, like, hold up. I'm like, first of all, pal, we don't throw mom under the bus. That's just not a good idea, right? And then I sneak over to her and I said, that was not cool. But you can sort of understand why he might do that, because you kind of always do remind him. I mean, my wife is one of those people where she can handle her schedule, my schedule, my son's schedule, my daughter's schedule, Bill, Jasmine, if you need some, we can outsource. She's very reasonable rates, right? She's got that kind of organizational ability. But just because she can doesn't mean that she should, because he's not going to do it as well, but he has to learn it himself. And you don't learn by watching, you learn by doing, right? So we made this really intense effort in middle school to do this, and a bunch of stories in the book about this and all the ways that it went kind of sideways until it went really well. I'd say his rehab counselor said he's doing great now. I'm teasing. But there was this period in sophomore year. This really gets to your point here, Jasmine, when there was a school dance. And my son, like his dad, is a little bit on the geeky side. And so it was a school dance, and he got invited to that party after the dance. First time to, like a real party in high school. And so my wife and I and Matthew were out for a walk. And he says, I got a question. I said, yeah, what's up? He said, well, so there's that dance tonight? I said, yeah, he said, well, I'm going to that party after it. So, well, do you need a ride? No, I'm good. I got Uber. Sure, you don't need us anymore. I said, well, what's your question? What do I do if I'm at the party and people are drinking alcohol? What a great question, right? But also what a really vulnerable thing, because this is his first real party ever. We could say alcohol, my God, no, what kind of people are, you're not going at all, and shut the whole thing down, right? But he had, because I'm really convinced of this approach that we'd taken since middle school, that was highly respectful. And we had this beautiful conversation about the pros and cons and whether you want to be there or not, and how you can assess, and if this happens, what you might do. And, these are things that really require judgment. Rules alone don't help you navigate difficult situations like that. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so glad you had these conversations last week about this, because from my perspective, much like Julie Lethcat-Hames, we're not building kids, we're raising adults. And I want to have this relationship, not so that he turns to me for every little thing, but when they're big picture questions about what do I do if they're having alcohol, or, 5 years from now. So do you think I should propose to her? Don't we want to be part of those conversations more than, fighting with you about homework because we don't love you? I mean,
Right. So I hate that our time is coming kind of down to the wire. So I'm going to keep trying to move this. We had a really great question in the chat bar that kind of ties in with something that we've already touched on in these questions before we started, and it was on screen time. The question that we were going to pose to the audience was, these days, how much are your kids on screens? A lot more than usual. Usual, about the same, actually less than usual. So if you take time and just answer that for us. One of the questions in the chat bar was, my kid always chooses electronics when given an option. What are your thoughts? What is your advice on that one?
Do you know how old the kid is?
She said, I believe 15.
Phil, you want to jump in first?
Sure. I mean, I think the way we think about technology in general is this. There's no earthly reason why preschool age kids, they should be playing with each other in an imaginative, cooperative way, as opposed to on a team or on an iPad. That as they get, once we start to introduce technology to them, we want to know more than they do about it, and we want so that we can work out ways of structuring their gaming or their use of YouTube, whatever they're doing, in a way that's healthy, and we can help them set limits on it. As they're teenagers, it's a little dicey because I don't want to send a kid off to college who hasn't really struggled with the same thing that we all have to struggle with. How do we set limits on this stuff?
Right.
Just within the last couple of years, 200 psychologists petitioned the American Psychological Association, asking them to censure psychologists who work in Silicon Valley, knowingly creating products that are as addictive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're up against. And I don't want to send a kid to college who hasn't really wrestled with that. So what we suggest is that we make healthy technology use a family goal. Because so many kids perceive their parents to constantly be on their phone or be hypocrites because we use the technology in a way that kids don't. And so I think some of it is we have discussions about this, and we offer to help kids set limits. And there's one of the people who wrote a review in our book for Amazon said, I was constantly reading from the technology chapter to my kid. He said, I needed to read this myself. He grabbed it from me, he went upstairs, and he read it. He came back down and he said, I think I need help managing my technology.
That's the whole holding the mirror up to see what we're really dealing with ourselves.
That's right. And so, I mean, certainly we have, if a kid is up all night gaming, don't let him drive. Or if he's sent to an expensive public school and he's not doing any homework, don't make expensive private school. Don't send him to private school. But there's certain things that we can do. Certain things that we, as a parent, I can't support this. But ultimately, the goal is for the kid to learn how to set limits on his own technology use. Now, do you want to?
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is that that study. Well, we tend to, as adults, rationalize or justify our own use of technology and go, rah, 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 what kids are doing. And it doesn't work so well, right? And so one of the things is to try to spend a lot of time understanding why your kids are using screens the way that they are and for what purpose, because we're so much more likely to influence their behavior if we're empathetic to them, if we take an interest and, it is Bill would say, treat them like they have a brain in their heads, right? I mean, these are incredibly powerful technologies. I mean, people do, there are kids who are making incredible art, who are making, communities, who are doing, philanthropic work. I mean, these are incredibly powerful tools. And there are other people who can sit there and about 12 hours a day on Instagram and do nothing more than scroll, right? And the problem is we don't know. Right. Bill and I had a talk early on with a local school, and there was a dad there who was well known in our community, of incredible wealth. He's about my age, and he had a kid. So I'm 50, and he had this kid who was like 5, and he was complaining about his kid technology, and he was going on basically all the kid wanted to do was be locked in his room on his phone, playing games. And this father was so upset, so angry. I mean, I was physically intimidated by this guy. I mean, but understandably, he was so upset because this is a guy who's worth a couple $2 billion, and he has his beautiful wife and this little kid, and the most precious thing in the world to him. And the kid doesn't want to spend time with him, wants to be on the phone. So the pain was just visceral. But when I asked him, I said, so what kind of game does he play? And I don't know much about video games. It's been a long time since I was really into that. And so what kind of games does he play? He says, I don't know, something stupid. And you could feel that pain. But I thought, my goodness, you know, if you're saying all he wants to do is play, you know, some sport, what kind of sport? I don't know, something stupid. We wouldn't do that if it was baseball or skateboarding or comic books or whatever. And so my advice is, you're not going to understand everything about what your kid is doing on technology, nor should you, particularly if they're teenagers, but to show some interest in that. Like my daughter watches way more YouTube than I wish she did right now, right? So I'm, you know, now at least I know to ask about Colin Keys and what are the oh God, the Norris nuts, the people in Australia and all these things, because it's like, you can watch whatever you want, right? And I'm much more likely to have influence that way. And I'll tell you a story. This is going to be in the second book. My son, when he was in 9th grade, Fortnite came through our household and our school and our community like a plague, right? A plague. And this is all they wanted to do. Now, part of it, kids, a little nerdy, all the kids were like the cool soccer players. They were doing this. My son got pretty good. So this is how he could be kind of cool, right? For at least an hour at a time. So he had a day off of school on a Friday. On Thursday night, I said, so what are you going to do tomorrow with your day off? He's like, play Fortnite. And I said, that's fun. Anything else? I don't know. I'll think about it. I'm like, okay. So I say nothing. So I go to work. I come home at like 6 o'clock on a Friday. There's my kid playing Fortnite, still in his pajamas. I admit to being a little bit hot because I had a long day of work, and I'm like, dude, your room's a mess. Anyway, but I say nothing. Well, I did say so. I said, can you do me a favor? Can you please either hurry up and win or hurry up and die? I would like to go out for pizza. Oh, and can you get out of your pajamas? Oh, yeah. My kid's really easygoing. So we go out, I calm down, we go off and have pizza. I say nothing more. Lovely night. Saturday, say nothing more. Sunday morning, say nothing more. I wait for it because I know it's coming. 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Oh gosh, I have all this work. I can't believe I'm such a dope. I wasted all of Friday playing Fortnite. If ever there was a parental like Serve and Spike in your face, told you so opportunity, this was as big as it gets. But there's this book so that seemed like the wrong call to make, right? So I said, can I ask you a question? I said, we always start with empathy. I said, I understand that frustration because this is what I always did in high school. I would always wait and I'd do things late on Sunday. I know how much that stinks. I said, but can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, do you have a sense of how many hours you actually spent playing Fortnite on Friday? Like maybe 10. Okay. If you think back on it, how many hours do you think would have been necessary to sort of get your fix in, connect with your friends, win a few rounds and still feel like you could do something else with your day? I don't know, maybe 5? Seems good. Can I ask you another question? Sure. In the future, would it help if your mom and I just kind of helped you manage your use of technology a little bit more? Yeah, that'd be really good. Now, by being empathetic, I understood the situation more and I had buy-in. And so we spent the next 2 years of life trying to be technology consultants, right? And I have buy-in. And so now, as Bill pointed out, we're acting in a consultative way, not a managerial way. And I feel much more confident about his being a freshman at college with fistfuls of our money, right? Knowing that he can do whatever he wants. He could game all day and never go to class, right? But he needed to struggle with these. And it wasn't perfect. My goodness. It wasn't like he, flipped a bell and flipped a switch and then it was perfect. It wasn't, because anything that's worth doing, if changing behavior takes a struggle, but it has to be our kids' struggle with our help, not our struggle to get them to change. It just doesn't work that way.
So let me wrap up with kind of bringing two concepts together. You've kind of walked us into this. I'd really like you to share with us what warning signs we should be aware of when we really do need to seek professional help. And then maybe somehow intertwine your thoughts on how we mitigate calm with high stakes testing. At the same time. We really enjoyed our time, and I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time, but these are still two more big issues, I think, that we're hoping to hit before we close.
Bill, you want to take the first and I'll jump on the second?
Sure. The first one was warning signs for what?
For when we really need to pursue professional help with our kids. Understanding that it's important for them to experience struggle and problem solving, but at what point do we say, okay, that's enough and we really need to get you help?
Yeah, yeah. So, it's interesting because there's a new program for treating anxiety, for children's anxiety, that just works with the parents. It's out of Yale. It's called, the acronym is SPACE. And it just works with the parents on changing their steps in the way they respond to the kids' anxiety. So I think it's actually going to transform the way we think about getting help for kids, because we have so much power in what we do. Now, having said that, certainly what we say is that we want kids to practice running their own life. But there are some situations where kids aren't capable of making decisions for themselves. And they include if kids if their anxiety is out of control, if they're really depressed, you can't think straight if you're really depressed. If kids seem to be dependent on drugs or alcohol, then we believe in power play. We put a kid in a therapy or in a program, whether they want to or not. Otherwise, short of that, our angle is that we want to offer help to kids. And usually I ask most of the kids I see, is that something you want help with? Whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's ADHD, whether it's a learning disability of some kind. And almost always they say, yeah. And if they say, no, I think I got that. And again, unless they can't think straight, unless they're depressed or they're doing drugs or they won't listen to reason. We want kids to make informed decisions. And there are some kids who are just, you can't have a discussion with them. So we say, parent, you just make the decision yourself. But so that's mainly, certainly the difference between typical anxiety and anxiety disorder has to do with the duration and the intensity and how impairing it is. So those are three things to think about regarding, does my kid need help, professional help? Is how long has this gone on? How intense is it? And how impairing is it? We all have anxiety, but there are some kids who anxiety kind of eats them alive, and they avoid all the things they should be doing. So those are three.
Yeah, and I'll add, if people don't know the book, Lisa D'Amour has a book called Under Pressure. It's really quite good. And it sort of echoes one of the points that Bill makes, that we all have anxiety. If we didn't have anxiety, something would be profoundly wrong with our brains, because really, the anxiety in the amygdala is a threat detector. The problem is if it's going off all the time. I mean, you want the smoke detector in your house to go off, right? If there's a fire, right? But if every time someone burns toast, or even you turn on the toast, then we kind of have a problem. And but it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend that to folks. High stakes testing. Well, the good news is some of that stuff seems to be disappearing, which means I may soon be out of a job. But that's until then.
Do you think that's long term?
No, I don't, because those tests, the problem with the tests is not the tests, it's the way that they're used, right? And really making them high stakes. I just started a podcast, actually just launched 2 days ago, if people want to, called Prep Talks Podcast. And the first person I interviewed is a guy named Jeff Salingo, who has a book out called Who Gets In and Why. And he was 3 years he spent a year as a kind of an embedded journalist at 3 universities going through the process. And one of the statistics in there that floored me is that there are only 41 colleges that have an admissions rate under 20%. There are only a few hundred that have an admissions rate under 50%, right? So the vast, 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 vast majority of colleges really just aren't that hard to get into. It's just that all of us seem to be jonesing for the same 41 colleges, right? The same Sonia Lupian of the nuts, the novelty, unpredictably, threat, and then sense of control, said that one of the single best things to lower stress is the idea of a plan B, right? You want to go for Harvard? Work hard for Harvard. It's a wonderful place. I'm sure you look beautiful in crimson. Awesome. But one of the things that's so helpful is to change thinking from a lot of mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to, because it simply cannot be the case that you have to go to an Ivy League school to be successful in life. I don't know, Jazz. I mean, I could survey everyone who's on this call. How many of us went to Ivy League schools? I know Bill did. He just shared with that 2.8 from University of Washington. I didn't go into Ivy League school. I don't, right? If you think about 100 people you know who are super successful, however you want to describe that, whether it's career, life, money, happiness, relationships, and how many of them do even know where they went to college? And so we really have to work hard against this idea that you have to go to an elite school to have an elite life, because it's just not so. We have a whole chapter in our book called Alternate Routes, and it's about all these people who took squiggly lines, right? Very few people are just cradled to Harvard, to McKinsey, to Wall. That really doesn't happen. Most of us do this and that. And that's how we figure out how to deal with setbacks, is how we figure out, actually, I don't like that much. And the problem is, it's painful, right, to get kind of knocked down, to not get your first choice, right? But there's a reason why we call it growing pains, right? It goes with the territory. Talking with kids, particularly if you have a kid who's super perfectionistic, trying to talk her out of going to an Ivy League school or thinking that she has to, it doesn't tend to work that well, because the more you dig in, the more she'll dig on the other side. One of the things we talk about in our book is how most people are really ambivalent about change, right? So if I wanted to lose, if you start telling me how important it is for me to, quit smoking or drinking or lose weight or whatever, be healthy, all I'll think about is how hard it is to do, right? And so when you start telling them, I don't want to see you work that hard, they come up with all the reasons why they have to work that hard. And we just want to approach that in ways that are sympathetic. So if a kid's saying, I have to get an A on this, well, tell me more about that. You just try to be as curious as possible and as non-judgmental as possible. And usually kids will start to realize, that isn't really so. And the last thing, if you have a kid, just because it's, I'm a test prep guy. Yeah. And you maybe, when I think high stakes tests, I think, college admissions tests. I don't know if that's where folks are. If you have a kid who's really great in school, but not on these tests, there's a group called fairtest.org that has the 1,000+ colleges that are test score optional. And this is the ultimate plan B. So I'll tell you the last story. I had these two girls I was working with, they're twins. One was super academic and a little intense and not so nice to her sister, who wasn't that academic. And the one who was less academic really was the soul of a poet. She was, an artist. She was depressed. She was just a complicated kid. And she asked me, she said, do I have to take these tests? I said, not at all. Not at all. And I pulled it right up. And I said, but here's the deal. I want you to. And she's like, why? And I said, because this is the perfect example. This is the perfect opportunity to work really hard to develop those skills, to try yourself, to deal with the stress tolerance. And if it doesn't go well, it doesn't matter, because we pulled up all the schools she was looking at. They're all test. You don't have to do this at all. You don't have to, but I want you to. And by changing the energy from I have to I want to, her stress, the temperature dropped about 15 degrees and her ACT score went up by 7 points. 7 points. Now we learned some stuff, but goodness, I'm so much more invested, as I started before, about the brain state that kids operate in for all those years of high school. Because we just don't want to have stress beget stress beget stress, because we take these beautiful minds and we impair them. And all we want, and because really, in terms of a successful life, it really doesn't matter where you go to college. It's great for your first job, but the idea that if you don't go to Harvard, you can't have a successful life, just not true.
We just can't thank you enough for your work and for this time that we've been able to spend with you. And I just hope that when your second book comes out, you remember us in San Antonio and consider coming, if it's after COVID, or we'll do another online chat like this. But we've really enjoyed our time with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having, and I'll say the kind of last point that we don't always make, or that we typically make, we didn't make tonight, is that for all of us as parents, when our kids are struggling and our fear spikes, it's because our fear is really about the future, right? It's not about today. It's not about bombing a test or struggling with reading now. Bill has had the benefit of working with thousands, if not tens of thousands of kids. And I've had a similar experience. And if we could tell you that we've seen hundreds or thousands of kids who struggled to read, right? Who had a hard time in high school, but they ended up had beautifully successful lives. You would just see this as part of the path that they're on. And the struggle now is the source of future strength. And so for a lot of you, you're here because your kids, you know, school isn't easy because reading is hard. School is going to be hard and it makes them anxious. But I mean, obviously you guys know as well as I do all the blessings of being dyslexic. It's just that the process of getting there isn't easy. And so if we can take that long-term view on where our kids are going to end up, it's so much easier to be lower stressed and really support. And by being less stressed, giving the kids the autonomy that they need to build the lives that we all want for them.
You've given us a little bit of insight and permission to have joy through the process.
You might as well love your kids. That's why you wanted them.
That's right.
We say in the book that just one of the best things you can do as a parent is simply enjoy your kid. And the part of the reason that this approach is so effective, this consultant kind of idea, it's so effective, but it's hard because if we say, I'm going to give you control over this, we have to sit on our hands or we have to zip our lip. And that gives us that low sense of control. So it's really stressful for us. So that's why we want more people to read the book and support each other in not being crazy. We all get sucked into the various pressures and fears and oh my God. And if I could tell you how many kids with dyslexia, or ADHD or anxiety I've followed who are incredible adults, that as Ned was saying, you just wouldn't worry as much. This is part of their path.
Well, it gives us hope, which really just fuels that opportunity for joy in the here and now and really enjoying our kids and their strengths and not focusing on all of the nuances of the artificial challenges that, again, don't necessarily predict their long-term success and adjustment. So we are very grateful. I forgot to plug the book. If the words that I've used haven't already plugged the book, I want everyone to, if you haven't already purchased the book and buy it for everyone that you know and love, because
buy it for any known enemies too.
They might end up being friends eventually, who knows? So anyway, thank you so much. We can't wait for your second book to come out.
We'll let you know.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Have a great night, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us.
Bye, San Antonio.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Great. Be well.
Thank you.
Is it just us who's on, or is everybody still on?
Where people are slowly jumping
Going
off.
home to their kids.